The Forgotten Farmhouse. A Life Reclaimed. By the time I was 62, I had forgotten what my own heartbeat sounded like. I woke every morning at 5:30, same as I had for 43 years, long before the sun thought to climb over the ridge. The old percolator on the stove hissed and spat like it was angry at being woken up too. I'd stand at the kitchen window in my dead husband's flannel shirt, sleeves rolled twice, and watch the fog lift off the corn stubble. The farmhouse creaked around me like an old dog turning over in its sleep. 240 acres of red clay and river bottom that had belonged to my father, and his father, and now, supposedly, to me. Supposedly. Because my son Caleb and his wife Lauren had already started measuring the curtains for the subdivision they were going to build the minute I was cold. My name is Marcus Lee Holloway. I am 62 years old. And until 8 months ago, I was nothing but a signature waiting to happen. The first time I heard them say it out loud, I was in the barn patching the tin roof after a hailstorm. The ladder was shaky, the hammer heavier than it used to be, and my knees sang hymns of complaint every time I climbed another rung. I'd left the side door open for the breeze. That's how their voices floated in on the dust motes. Once the old man kicks it, we list with Dalton Realty. They're offering $22,000 an acre for the river frontage alone, Caleb said, excitement crackling in his voice like green wood in a fire. Lauren laughed, that thin, expensive laugh she'd picked up after she started selling essential oils to doctors' wives. We'll be debt-free in one closing, baby. I already mocked up the neighborhood name, Holloway Hollow. Isn't that adorable? People will pay extra for irony. I froze with the hammer mid-swing. A nail slipped from my fingers and pinged down the tin like a gunshot. They didn't hear it. They were too busy planning swimming pools and cul-de-sacs on land that still had my wife's peonies pushing up through the grass every spring. I climbed down slower than I went up. My chest felt strange, tight, then suddenly too large, like something inside had snapped its leash. I stood in the barn shadows and listened to my only child price my grave before I was in it. That night I didn't sleep. I sat on the porch with a glass of bourbon I didn't taste and stared at the fields my grandfather cleared with a mule and a breaking plow. The moon laid silver across the rows like a debt coming due. I was 62 years old, healthy enough to work sunup to sundown, and already buried in their minds. Something shifted in me that night. Not rage, not yet. It was colder. Sharper. It was clarity. The next morning I brewed coffee, same as always, but I didn't sit in the rocker. I opened the roll-top desk in the parlor that hadn't been touched since Ellen died. Inside were seed catalogs, unpaid hospital bills from her cancer, and a manila folder labeled Trust, Do Not Lose. I'd forgotten it existed. Ellen had made me draw it up 15 years ago when the first developer came sniffing. I'd signed it, stuffed it away, and gone back to plowing. I read every page under the naked bulb of the kitchen table. My hand shook, but not from fear. From possibility. Article 7, Section 3. Upon the death or voluntary activation by Marcus Lee Holloway, the entirety of Hollow Ridge Farm, 240 acres, including all buildings, mineral rights, and riparian corridors, shall be transferred irrevocably into the Hollow Ridge Conservation and Agricultural Trust, a 501(c)(3), to be formed for the purposes of sustainable farming education, low-income agricultural internships, and permanent protection from subdivision or commercial development. Voluntary activation. I could pull the trigger while I was still breathing. I laughed out loud in that empty kitchen. The sound startled me, it had been so long since I'd heard it. I won't bore you with the details of lawyers and filings. Suffice it to say I moved fast and quiet. I cashed in the life insurance policy Ellen insisted on, hired a retired environmental attorney named Patricia Wu who'd been itching to sink her teeth into a land use case, and rounded up 5 other farmers who'd been bullied by developers. We filed the trust on a Tuesday. By Friday the paperwork was recorded at the courthouse. By Monday I had a stack of bylaws, a board of directors, mostly widows and cranky old men like me, and a bank account with $47,312.14 seeded from my own savings. I renamed the farmhouse itself the Hollow Ridge School for Sustainable Living. Ordered a sign from the feed store, simple pine board, black letters. Hung it myself with a cordless drill and a heart that finally sounded like my own again. But I knew the storm was coming. Caleb had a nose for money the way a hound has for blood. He showed up 3 weeks later in his new silver pickup, Lauren riding shotgun and sunglasses that cost more than my first tractor. They walked into the kitchen without knocking, same as always, like the house was already theirs. Dad. Caleb's smile was tight. We need to talk. I was at the stove frying okra in bacon grease. Didn't turn around. Door's right there if talking's all you came for. Lauren perched on a stool, legs crossed, designer boots dangling. Don't be dramatic, Marcus. We're family. I flipped the okra. The sizzle filled the silence like gunfire. Caleb pulled a folder from his briefcase. Dalton Realty upped their offer. $25,000 an acre cash. That's $6 million, Dad. 6 million. You could buy a condo in Florida, hire a nurse, live like a king. I turned off the burner. Set the cast iron skillet on a trivet Ellen painted with sunflowers 30 years ago. I already live like a king, I said. Got a roof, a dog, and land that still remembers my name. Lauren rolled her eyes. This isn't the 1950s. Land is an asset, not a museum. I looked at my son, really looked. 36 years old, soft around the middle, hair already thinning though he spent $200 every 6 weeks to hide it. He had Ellen's mouth, but none of her kindness. Caleb, I said quietly, when's the last time you walked these fields without a calculator in your head? He flushed red. That's not fair. Fair? I laughed, and it came out rough. You priced my coffin before I had a cough. Don't talk to me about fair. Lauren stood up, voice syrupy. We're worried about you, Marcus. At your age. My age? I stepped closer. I planted 200 tomato sets yesterday. Split and stacked a quart of wood the day before. My age is none of your damn business. Caleb slammed the folder on the table. Sign the listing agreement, Dad. Or we'll contest competency. I've already talked to a lawyer. The kitchen went still. Even the okra stopped popping. I reached into the drawer beside the fridge and pulled out my own folder, thick, official, stamped in red, recorded. I slid it across the table. Too late, I said. Hollow Ridge Farm belongs to the trust now. Irrevocable. You'd have better luck suing the wind. Lauren snatched it up, flipping pages like they were on fire. Her face drained of color. This is fraud. You can't just. I surely can, I said. And I did. While you were picking out granite countertops for houses that'll never be built. Caleb's mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air. You're cutting me out? Your only son? No, I said, voice steady as creek stone. I'm cutting you loose. There's a difference. They left in a whirl of curses and flying gravel. I stood on the porch and watched the dust settle. My hands were shaking, but I didn't feel empty. I felt full for the first time in years. Word spread fast in a small county. By Sunday the church parking lot buzzed like a hive. Brother Raymond shook my hand so hard I thought he'd dislocate something. Marcus Holloway, you just saved every family farm from here to the river, he said, eyes shining. Developers gonna think twice now. Miss Lorraine, 81, and mean as a snake with a headache, hugged me in the fellowship hall. I added you to my prayer list, sugar. The good part, not the smite the wicked part. Though Lord knows you earned both. I laughed until my ribs hurt. That week I placed an ad in the county paper and on every farm bulletin board from here to Knoxville. Wanted, dreamers, misfits, and stubborn old goats. Internships available, room, board, and hard work. No experience necessary. Must love dirt. I expected maybe 2 replies. got 47. Young people with tattoos and college debt. Veterans with quiet eyes. A widow from Ohio who'd never planted a seed in her life but wanted to learn before she died. They came in pickups and greyhounds and one on a motorcycle with a parrot in the sidecar. We turned the old dairy barn into bunkhouses. Painted the chicken coop sunflower yellow. Built raised beds out of barn wood so folks with bad hips could garden standing up. Named the big field Ellen's Meadow and planted it solid in wildflowers that bloomed purple and gold like Bruce's healing. I taught soil chemistry at dawn. Miss Lorraine taught canning at noon. A kid named Sky, real name unpronounceable, taught TikTok and beekeeping. We ate together on sawhorse tables under the stars. Somebody always brought a guitar. Somebody always cried the first night, homesick or heartsick or just overwhelmed by space and quiet and people who didn't want anything from them except their best. Caleb came back 6 months later. Alone. I was in the greenhouse wrestling a roll of shade cloth when I saw his truck crawl up the drive like it was ashamed. He got out slow, no sunglasses, no Lauren. Just jeans and a faded feed and seed cap pulled low. I waited by the potting bench. Didn't speak. He stopped 10 feet away. Heard you turned the place into some kind of commune. Not a commune, I said. A community. He kicked at the dirt. Lauren left. I nodded once. Said I was obsessed. That I couldn't let go of something that was never mine to begin with. His voice cracked on the last word. I set the shade cloth down. Walked over slow. You eat today? He shook his head. Come on then. We sat on the porch steps with bowls of butterbean soup and cornbread. The interns gave us space, knew the look of family business when they saw it. Sun set fire to the ridge. A whippoorwill started up. I was wrong, Caleb said finally, so quiet I barely heard. About everything. Yep. I don't know how to fix it. You start by showing up, I said. Not for the land. For the people on it. Including me. He looked at me then, really looked. Eyes red, mouth trembling. I'm scared, Dad. I'm 36 years old and I got nothing that's mine. Not even myself. I put my hand on his shoulder, first time I'd touched him without anger or obligation in years. Then stay. Work. Get dirty. Learn who you are when nobody's paying you to be somebody else. He cried then. Not pretty Hollywood tears, ugly, snot-nosed, shoulders shaking. I held him like I hadn't since he was 9 and skinned his knee on the gravel. The soup got cold. The whippoorwill sang us through the dark. He stayed. Started in the compost pile, lowest job on the totem pole. Shoveled manure until his hands blistered, then calloused, then healed. Learned to milk the new goats. Burned supper 3 nights running till Miss Lorraine took pity and taught him cornbread. Fell asleep in the hayloft with a book on soil regeneration open on his chest. One night in late October I found him on the porch swing staring at the stars like they owed him money. Remember when you were little, I said, easing down beside him, you asked why the stars don't fall? He huffed a laugh. You told me they're nailed up there by angels too lazy to sweep. Still believe that? Nah. I think they stay because they choose to. Same as us. I nodded slow. Exactly. Winter came hard that year. Pipes froze. A nor'easter took the roof off the equipment shed. We worked side by side, him and me and 20 interns who'd become family. Caleb's laugh started sounding like the boy I used to carry on my shoulders to pick the highest peaches. Spring brought the first graduation, 12 interns heading out to start their own farms with seed money we'd crowdfunded. We had a potluck that lasted till dawn. Somebody set off fireworks left over from the 4th. Sky's parrot learned to say compost happens, and nobody had the heart to correct it. Caleb stayed on as assistant director. Wore the title like a man wearing his own skin for the first time. One Sunday in May, a year to the day since I'd filed the trust, I walked out to Ellen's meadow at sunrise. The wildflowers were hip-high, buzzing with bees drunk on nectar. I carried 2 cups of coffee. Caleb met me there, same as I'd asked. We stood quiet a long time. I used to think this land was my prison, I said finally. Turns out it was my parachute. He swallowed hard. I'm sorry I tried to cut the strings. I know. I love you, Dad. The words hung between us like morning mist. I hadn't heard them from him since he was 14 and thought love was a weakness. I love you too, son. We drank the coffee. Watched the sun crown the ridge. Somewhere behind us the rooster crowed off-key and the parrot squawked about Compost. Life, loud and messy and perfect. Later that morning I added a new plaque beneath the farmhouse sign. Simple pine board, same black letters. Hollow Ridge School for Sustainable Living. Founded 2025 by Marcus Lee Holloway. In memory of Ellen Rose Holloway, who taught me that the best crop any man ever grows is the courage to live on his own terms. Caleb planed the wood himself. Sanded it smooth. Burned the letters with a magnifying glass and the sun, said it felt right, using light instead of fire. People still ask if I ever regret cutting my only child out of the inheritance. I tell them the truth, I didn't cut him out. I cut him in. Into the dirt. Into the work. Into the daily miracle of watching things grow that you didn't plant for profit but for people. $6 million would have bought him a big house with no soul. 240 acres bought him back his. Some nights I sit on the same porch swing and watch the stars that never fall. Caleb joins me sometimes, boots caked with the day's honest dirt. We don't talk much. Don't need to. The land does it for us, whispering through the corn silk, singing through the wind in the pecans Ellen planted the year Caleb was born. I am 63 now. My knees still complain, but my heart beats loud and clear. I am no longer a signature waiting to happen. I am Marcus Lee Holloway. I am home. And these fields will never be subdivided. Not in my lifetime. Not in his. Not ever. Because some things aren't for sale. They're for keeping. They're for passing down the right way. Hand to hand, heart to heart. Until the last star finally chooses to fall. And even then, we'll still be here. Growing tomorrow. The moral of the forgotten farmhouse runs deeper than any single sentence, but if I had to carve it into the porch post right beside Ellen's wildflower plaque, it would read, "Never mistake inheritance for ownership. The only thing you truly leave behind is the person you taught your children to be. Everything else, land, money, houses, is just dirt waiting to see whose hands love it enough to keep it alive." Or, in Clara May's plain-spoken style, they didn't want my farm, they wanted my surrender. I gave them neither. In refusing to die on their schedule, I finally started living on mine, and in losing the son who only loved what I could give him, I gained the man he could still become. The story teaches 5 hard-won truths. Your life is not a down payment on someone else's dream. At 62, Marcus still had decades of mornings left. Selling his soul to buy his son's comfort would have killed him faster than any grave. Real inheritance isn't received, it's earned. Caleb thought $6 million was his birthright. He discovered the harder truth: the only legacy that sticks is the one you sweat for, side by side, when nobody's watching. Boundaries aren't walls, they're fertilizer. Saying no to greed didn't destroy the relationship, it forced it to grow roots deep enough to survive the real storms. Land remembers love better than blood. 240 acres didn't care whose name was on the deed. It bloomed for the hands that fed it, not the mouths that priced it. The bravest crop any parent ever plants is their own dignity. When Marcus chose himself, he didn't orphan his son, he gave him the hardest, kindest gift a father can give, the chance to stand up straight without leaning on someone else's spine. In the end, the farm wasn't saved from subdivision. It was saved for multiplication. One bitter no became 1,000 new beginnings. One broken father-son bond became a whole community of chosen family. And one old man who refused to be invisible became the rootstock for every dream that will ever grow on that red clay ridge. That's the moral, plain and simple. Protect your life while you're still living it. Everything you're afraid to lose is waiting on the other side of the courage you keep swallowing.